Welcome, faithful YouTube viewers. How's everybody doing tonight? All right. My name is Reverend Brandon Moore. Thank you for tuning in to Theology Thursdays. Great to see you. Great to have you here. By the way, if you're new here, please subscribe to the channel. I live stream every Tuesday and Thursday night. Tuesdays being Trad Tuesdays or Traditional Tuesdays. Thursdays being Theology Thursdays. And I'm trying to hit my goal of 1,000 subscribers, hopefully by the end of the calendar year. I really hope that we can get there. We're already more than halfway there, so I know it's possible. So please hit that subscribe button if you're new. And if you're already subscribed, thank you very much. Please like the video, comment below, share with your friends, family, what have you. I want to give a few shout outs real quick before we get going to a few new subscribers. My Brain Garbage, Ryan Shaw, Petrosky, I think that's how you say it. Hopefully I didn't butcher your name. And Daniel Minsing, thank you very much for subscribing. I appreciate it. Every subscriber is a new member to the family here at the YouTube's channel. All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, guys. Happy Thanksgiving. Wonderful stuff. By the way, some housekeeping. I got me some new brandy. Very nice. Very nice. Had to pop it open for Thanksgiving. Really good stuff. Really good brandy. I'll be taking some sips on that throughout the stream. So good times, good times. What are you thankful for, guys? Comment below. Let me know. Thanksgiving is a bit of an odd holiday. It is somewhat a tradition of, prior harvest festivals. In fact, the service that I did this evening at the church that I pastor was the Festival of the Harvest, according to the Lutheran hymnal. And so Thanksgiving goes back as far as traditions go, although this is Theology Thursday, not Trad Tuesday. As far as traditions go, Thanksgiving has a long history, not just the American version of Thanksgiving with the Indians and the Pilgrims and stuff like that, but harvest time has been a time of giving thanks and offering thanks to the Lord for all his benefits and all the things that he has had mercy on us with, and giving us these good things like food, clothes, meat, drink, shelter. I have to go to Doug Tenaple had a wonderful tweet today, and I retweeted it. If you're not following me on the Twitters, please do so at RevBWar. And Doug Tenaple was really on point when he talked about, when you give thanks, you can't give thanks to an accident. You can't give thanks to particles. You can't give thanks to luck or anything like that. You give thanks to beings, persons. God is three persons in one being. And so the idea of giving thanks, having Thanksgiving, having an offering of thanks on this day in particular, kind of something that the secular world doesn't really think of. They talk about, it's time for turkey and family and stuff like that, and maybe they'll talk about what they're thankful for. But the odd part about all that is the idea of where is the thanks going exactly? Who are we thanking? Like, maybe you could say, if you're a secular person or an atheist or an agnostic or whatever, maybe you're thankful to the members of your family or to the members of your community or whoever's been there for you. And that's fine. It's wonderful. But, if you keep going back to where those things came from, were you just lucky to get born into a good family? Were you just privileged by your ability to be in a good community? Or were these things actually a transcendent gift from the one who created you and the one who gave you life and all of these things, it's really, as Doug TeNaples said, it's really rude to have these things given to you as gifts and not give thanks. And so that's something to think about as we go for the last, couple of hours of Thanksgiving, and we're talking about, this idea of giving thanks for the good things that God has given us. So I wanted to point that out. For everybody, just something interesting. And thanks to Doug TeNaples for pointing that out on Twitter. Let's get going with the topic for today. The topic for today is something that came to my mind as I was actually studying the gospel reading for the divine service of the Festival of the Harvest. For anyone who has their handy-dandy Bible with them, you can look to Luke 12, verses 13 through 21. And we're not going to read the passage verbatim. In fact, I already preached a sermon on this not just a few hours ago, so I'm not going to read the passage here on the live stream. I'm not really going to give you a sermon, but I want to use this as a jumping off point. If you are interested in hearing the sermon that I preached for Thanksgiving Day, down in the description below is going to be a link to my sermons there at St. Patrick Lutheran Church. And you're more than welcome to listen to those and give me some feedback on those as well. But as I was studying this passage and reflecting on the fact that we are in the end of the church year. Now, for the regular, I guess you'd say that the worldly calendar, the calendar year is not over yet. 2020 is not over, per se. But the church year is. The church year is coming to a close. We had, for anyone who is not familiar, liturgical churches go by a liturgical calendar or church calendar. And so this past Sunday that we just had was the last Sunday of the church year. And really, the new church year starts this upcoming Sunday with the first Sunday in the season of Advent. And so the church year is coming to a close. And so unlike most normal people, I guess you'd say, I tend to be a little bit weird in that I don't have the type of reflection moments and the type of things that people would associate with like New Year's Eve or whatever, reflecting on the new year. I tend to do this the last week of the church year. I get very reflective. I look back at what this year, the church year has brought to us. And as I was studying the gospel lesson for the Festival of the Harvest, I realized that Jesus, as King, has conquered all throughout this year, including conquering coronavirus. Now, how has he done that? Well, let's think about this for a second. First, I want to talk about this parable in the Gospel of Luke, the parable of the rich fool. The gospel lesson starts out in verse 13 when a guy in the crowd that is hearing Jesus speak raises his voice and says, "Jesus, tell my brother to give me the share of the inheritance." Now, it's a little bit, it's kind of bold of the guy for saying something like that. Jesus, settle this matter that I have with my brother over the inheritance, please, because obviously my brother is being horrible to me and I'm the one that deserves that inheritance. Jesus tells him, he's not the judge over that. Now that can seem a little bit odd to us because, well, Jesus is judge and arbiter over everything. Is he not? Now, this is something that I pointed out in my sermon for this gospel passage, is that Jesus is basically saying he's not here to solve all your problems. He's not here to solve every single worry or stress or anything that comes into your life. Your life is going to have suffering. That's a part of it. And so Jesus goes on to tell this parable of this rich man who yielded many crops, so much so that he had to build bigger barns in order to fit the crops in. And once he had all of that stuff, he said, my soul is settled. Let me eat, drink, and be merry, because I've got everything I ever need. And at that moment, the Lord beckons him and requires his soul. And at that moment, the moment of death, none of those possessions, nothing that he had stored up, was able to save him. You know that old phrase, you can't take it to your grave. Whatever you have in this life, you can't take it with you. That's kind of what that parable is talking about. And so as I was studying through this, I started reflecting on it. I started meditating on this passage of Scripture, and something occurred to me. And because I'm a Lutheran, I do not believe that God speaks audibly anymore. He speaks through his word, but you think about the practical application of what this scripture is talking about. And I started thinking about the fact that we value the ends of all things. We also value immediate action. I mean, our nature as sinful human beings is to say, especially with a year like 2020, I mean, goodness, 2020 has been a crazy year, maybe more so than that. So many things that we never thought would happen have happened in 2020. And coronavirus is just a part of that. The fact that the Wuhan virus has come and laid siege over the entire world is something that no one was even considering in 2019, let alone years ago. The idea that we're having to fight, especially in America, to have any sort of freedom. I mean, did you have more than 10 people over at your house for Thanksgiving today? Did you? I mean, that's a little bit insane. It's something that we did not expect to deal with. And our sinful human nature wants an end to that. And rightly so. I mean, we don't want to suffer. It's not in our nature to want to suffer per se. But the truth is, because of our sin, we end up being impatient in suffering. And that's really part of why I titled this stream the way I did, because we want somebody to come in and vanquish coronavirus, whether that be through a vaccine. Some people want a government mandate. I mean, some of these things, some people are just so scared of that it's who knows what we need to do exactly? Who knows when it's all going to end? But because of our sin, we really don't see the purpose or the transcendence of our God in suffering. When Jesus tells the man in the crowd in this gospel passage in Luke 12 that he's not the arbiter of these things, that he's not going to step in and tell the man's brother how to use the inheritance, it's because that Jesus is not providing simply an escape for these things. I know that that's a popular message for a lot of televangelists and TV preachers and all sorts of different. That is not what Jesus has come. Jesus has not come to give you your best life now. Sorry, he's not. What he's come to do is to remind you that one day your soul is going to be beckoned up to the Lord's dwelling, and you're going to have to answer for the sins that you have committed, whether you believe they are big or small or whatever the case may be. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And we have this notion about us that things need to be solved as quickly and as painlessly as possible. And in doing that, we completely miss the transcendent nature and the purpose of suffering. That's ultimately what happens. I mean, you look at the apostles. You look at the apostles, especially in the book of Acts, they counted themselves worthy. They rejoiced at the idea that they would suffer, because in suffering, it brings us closer to Christ. Because, as it says in Isaiah 53, he is a man of sorrows, and he carried our griefs. He is walking with us in the suffering. And so the suffering of the past year is not something, as the Apostle Paul would say, it's not something to compare to in glory. I mean, think about this. You think about what Jesus is preparing us for. Really, he's preparing us to die. Jesus, all of our lives, is preparing us to have a good and blessed death. In fact, every single Sunday, in the general prayer for the church, I pray that everyone would be saved from an evil death, that we do not want to be at the mercy of an evil death, because that's not the way we want to go out. We don't want to go out like this rich fool who said, I have all these possessions, but they mean nothing when your soul is called away from your body and you have to answer for the sins that you've committed against the God who gave you, in his mercy, gave you all these good things: life, breath, food, shelter, whatever you may have. Whatever you may have and whatever is yours really is the Lord's. And so this is where it comes down to when it comes to suffering. Now, I have to get into the biblical definition of conquering, because, of course, the title of this stream is The King Who Conquered Coronavirus. Now, we see conquered, and like I said, we think someone who's done away with it, someone who's fixed the problem, when Jesus doesn't promise such a thing. But what does he promise? What exactly did Jesus come to do? Because I hear a lot of people saying these days, and really this is not really something new. The devil doesn't have any real new tricks. Nothing's new under the sun. But a lot of people are saying, those Old Testament prophecies, Jesus didn't really fulfill those things. And, the Jews were expecting a conquering Messiah. Well, you know what? They got a conquering Messiah. And you say, well, how so? How did they get a conquering Messiah? Because Jesus came in and told us to love our enemies. And Jesus didn't overthrow the Roman government. So obviously, he's not a conquering Messiah. That is a view of conquering that is too small and too insignificant for it to be dealing with God coming down in human flesh. It's just not the right view of conquering. It's not. It is a worldly view of conquering. It is a temporal view of conquering. But if God is going to take on human flesh to come into humanity, don't you think that he's going to conquer something much bigger than just a temporal worldly government? Don't you think all those Old Testament passages about the conquering Messiah mean something more than just overthrowing the Romans in the first century? Don't you think that if God actually had this grand plan to come and to save the world, he's going to do something much bigger than overthrowing the Romans? I think so. And that's where we come into the biblical definition of conquering. What did Jesus come to do? What did he come to do? Well, he came, took on human flesh, the eternal Son of God, coming as a human, fully divine, fully human, to suffer on the cross, carry our sorrows, bear our iniquities, cleanse us of all unrighteousness. He stomps on the serpent's head, as it says in Genesis 3:15, that he would do. And he rises from the dead. He conquers. He conquers your sin. He conquers the devil. He conquers death itself. He overturned death. Whether you realize it or not, anybody listening, whether you're Christian, atheist, whatever, tobogganist, whatever you are, your biggest problem is not the temporal things that you go through in this life. Your biggest problem is that you're going to die. And because you are going to die, you know that it's because of sin, not just your actions in sinning, but the fact that all of creation has been infected with sin, that by our very nature we are sinners. And so we have a problem. We sin and we die. We are infected. We face death, and that death leads to eternal punishment if those sins aren't paid for, if the fine isn't dealt with, if the crimes are not covered. And so Jesus does conquer. Whether you want to realize it or not, whether you want to believe it or not, whether you have a different definition than what the Old Testament has of conquering, Jesus conquered. He conquered death. He conquered the thing that you are helpless to fix. And so when you think about conquering in that sense, well, then coronavirus is not that big a deal, is it? The things that we suffer in this life are not that big a deal, is it? No, it's not. Because what do you compare this temporal suffering to the weight of glory in eternity? What do you compare it to? You can't. Because ultimately, everything in this earth will pass away. You will pass away. I will pass away. All of these possessions and things that we're so thankful for, although we refuse to thank the actual one who gave us those things, but ultimately, all of those things will still pass away, and we're helpless to fix any of that. Heaven and earth will pass away, but Jesus said, "My words will not pass away." He has conquered death, and more specifically, he's conquered it for you. For you. He's conquered death, hell, and the devil for you. That's how he conquers. That's how he conquers. And ultimately, he will come again in glory to judge both the living and the dead. And his kingdom will have no end. All of this is going to be gone one day. All the things that you sat around the table and been thankful for, even if you were thankful to the Lord for giving him in his mercy, they're still going to go away. Those things are going to go away. The word of the Lord will not go away. The fact that he has already conquered death and your enemy, death, is dead. Death is dead. Think about that. The reason why I can title this stream "The King Who Conquered Coronavirus" is because death is swallowed up in victory. The grave doesn't have a sting. Death doesn't have a victory anymore. Death is not an issue anymore in the kingdom of Christ. Death has been defeated. And so, coronavirus is defeated. Not in the temporal sense, of course, just like Jesus didn't come and overthrow the Romans like the first century Jews wanted him to do. That's not the biblical definition of conquering. See, Jesus has eternal things in mind. Again, going back to the passage in Luke 12, why does Jesus say to the guy that he's not the judge of or arbiter of his little dispute with his brother over the inheritance? It's because Jesus is not here to do the things that we want him to do or that we think he should do. No, he's here to do the things that he knows needs to be done. You know, this whole idea in both the church and in the secular world that, Jesus came to help me discover who I really was. Bullshit. Jesus came to tell you who he knew you were and to do something about it. And that's much better news than what you may think on the surface. That may hurt you, that may hurt your pride. Good. It should convict you. But at the end of the day, your enemy, the thing you're most helpless and powerless to get rid of, sin, death, and the devil, Jesus takes it. He takes your sin, and in his showing of love toward you, he dies. He dies your death. And he conquers death by dying. That's not worldly conquering. If someone were to tell you, I'm going to win a war by dying on the battlefield, you would think they were absolutely insane. But Jesus does exactly that. He wins the cosmic battle. He wins salvation by dying. He defeats death by tasting death and then rising from the dead, victorious over that sin, our flesh, and the devil. So, did the king conquer coronavirus? Absolutely. Absolutely, the king conquered coronavirus. And we may not see the outcome of this conquering until glory. Maybe till we go to be with the Lord or the Lord comes back, whichever comes first. We may not get to see the ends. We may not get to see what becomes of this whole thing. As we go to the end of the church year or the calendar year, whichever one you want to pick, as we get to the end of the year and reflect back, we may not see the outcome or the ends of things like coronavirus or a nasty presidential election or the cancer that my family member is suffering through. We may not see those ends temporally in this life. It may only be in glory. It may be when Christ comes back that we fully understand the purpose of those things. But ultimately, we can rest assured that death has no victory over those who are clinging to Christ in faith. Those who love the Lord will see him in glory. And so there's hope. There's hope for Thanksgiving. Despite the suffering, despite COVID lockdowns, maybe you couldn't get together with your family today. Maybe you're in a bad place because of all that. Maybe it's just life in general that's getting you down. I don't know. But what I do know is that suffering is not purposeless. And your King has conquered that suffering and has chosen to bear the suffering with you. He has chosen to take that cross upon himself, and he is going to be walking with you, but you have to receive that by grace alone, through faith alone, in him alone. And so as we go to the end of this year, as we're here on Thanksgiving, thinking about all the good things that the Lord has given us, we got to remember, no matter what, even in the midst of our suffering, that the King has conquered. And he will conquer until we go to see him or until he returns in glory. Either way, Maranatha, come quickly, Lord Jesus. That's all I got for tonight's stream, guys. Thank you for tuning in to Theology Thursdays. My name again, Reverend Brandon Ward. Please subscribe and share the video. Hit like and leave a comment below. And we will see you next week. Get God-pilled. Good night.